formally begin, since I see several babies in attendance, which I always welcome, I do want you to note two things. One, I have 3 children 6 and under at my own home, though not in this room tonight. And 2, I grew up in New York. And I say this to reassure the parents who have brought their small local babies. I am capable of being louder than a child. So if you have some mild peeping or even some more enthusiastic vocalizations, rest assured you do not need to leave the room on my behalf. I appreciate the introduction, and the attention to the word instigator, because in some sense, in writing this book and entitling the book in particular, I was trying to give people a clear warning with almost every single word of the title and subtitle that I intend this book to be taken as both an invitation and a threat. I have received objections to every single word in the book that are not, a basic article, definite or indefinite, as of all past master. Very early on, my agent warned me, do you need to have the word dignity in it? And he said this with an eye to my good and to helping me succeed in the publishing world. I'm like, what do you think? He's like, well, what if it were just dependence, a manifesto, or dependence, the demands? I'm like, what's the problem with dignity? And he's like, well, people in publishing have caught on that it's Catholic. I'm like, what? They know it's a Catholic idea. I'm like, I hear plenty of people who are not Catholic want to claim the mantle of dignity. It's like, it's passing by, they've realized. I'm like, well, I'm Catholic, and so they're going to figure it out sooner or later. So that's so much for dignity. For dependence, I kind of got from all sides. Is this the best word? Did you have to say dependence? Couldn't you have said interdependence? Can't this be a book about the dignity of interdependence, that we need things from each other, but we give to each other? And every time people would say this, and I got this a bunch, I'd say, well, what's the problem with dependence? As just a facet of interdependence, be sure, but a focused facet. And they go, well, dependence means you're not giving anything back. And I'm like, yes. And they go, and I'm like, and? Waiting for them to say, like, and that's bad. Because, of course, the crux of my book is arguing that all of us will have moments in life, sometimes quite long periods of our life, where we are indeed dependent and can't rely on regaining the status of interdependent or paying back in the currency we've been given. And I am making the case for that, not the more polite and palatable interdependence. And I think everyone who objected understood the distinction, but also therefore is making the case of why you didn't really need to defend the dignity of interdependence at all. Feminist. Kind of alienated different people than the people who were alienated by dignity. The reason I put feminist on the title, first of all, depends on how I define feminist, which is advocating for justice to women as women, not as generic human beings or as defective men. For tonight, we'll save it for the Q&A if this is a fair summary of all of the multifaceted fighting factions of feminism that have taken different stances on almost every single issue you could fold under that umbrella. But it is my stance, and I did want that to be both an open door for people who might not otherwise pick up the book, and a real tribute to the way that my own sense of justice was formed by my non-Catholic second wave feminist mother, who always had an attention to what it meant to be attentive to women as women. And I think manifesto, in case you weren't clued in by the other 3 words, tells you although this book is pink, and although there is a baby on the front, the book is meant to be dangerous. The book is asking you to consider that you may need to overturn certain structures politically or socially to be fully just and to live deeply rooted in the truth. So which truth, or truth specifically, am I claiming need this kind of manifesto-like defense? The church is always telling the same truth from age to age, but in every period of time, certain elements of the truth the church has been telling are the ones that stand out as countercultural and controversial. And today, many of the things that draw the ire of the culture, or at least prompt a certain skepticism, or how can you justify that, are claims about the nature of the human person. And so the 2 truths that I intend my book to put forward and defend, and be willing to smash down a lot of other things in defense of these truths, take what I hope is a sort of cruciform form. So first, that women's equal dignity to men is not premised on our being interchangeable with men. And second, that all of us, male or female, are much more characterized in our humanity by our dependence than by our autonomy. So let's start with that first idea. I think many people grow attached to the idea that men and women need to be fully interchangeable with each other because they are attached to a partial truth. They let eclipse a bigger truth. And that partial truth is the one I kind of included as my first clause, that men and women are equal in dignity. Well, why are they equal in dignity? You might need to have a kind of anthropology, perhaps rooted in a creator or otherwise constructed, to talk about what makes men and women equal in dignity. But if you're able to rely on the idea that men and women are essentially identical, you don't have to make a very deep philosophical argument at all if you can get that argument accepted. If men and women are the same in all essentials and everything that's most important about them, then anyone trying to distinguish them or talk about, well, what's just to women as women, men as men, is the presumptive, if not bigot, person making a distinction where none justly exists. So, to an extent, even though I'm picking a fight very deliberately with people who take this view, I appreciate that they're rooted in a truth of the equal dignity of men and women and that are defending it with something that can't hold. Now the problem is that once you put this forward as your defense, you're going to keep getting caught out by our actual natures and biology. And there's different things that kind of have more or less stark differences between men and women that you're then forced to find a way to explain away or paper over. On a lot of traits, men and women follow the pattern of two overlapping bell curves. Women are, on average, shorter than men. The bell curves aren't so very far apart, so it's possible, perhaps even in this room, though I promise not to make you stand up to check, to find in a given room a woman who is taller than a particular man, even as I can say with a great deal of confidence that the averages probably follow exactly the difference you'd expect. There are some traits where those overlapping bell curves are very far apart. Women have, on average, much lower grip strength than men, so it doesn't look like the height curves. I think the strongest 5% of women for grip strength are weaker than all but the lowest 5% of men. So I wouldn't be confident in this room if I had a series of gradedly difficult jars that would find a man who couldn't open a jar that a woman could. And I think this is the kind of difference we're able to tolerate philosophically. I have never, even on Twitter, heard someone argue, men's bell curve for jar opening barely overlaps with women's, and that's why women shouldn't vote. That we're able to tolerate some distinct pronounced differences and say, well, but that's trivial, isn't it? Maybe the difference is there, maybe it's real, maybe it's stark, but do we care? But I think the more attentive we become to any of these differences, the more dangerous they feel, when we don't have a way to articulate why we can value men and women in their difference. So in one example that you can trust me to be objective about, because I've never been personally implicated by it, even though I have opened jars, so I'm implicated in that one. There is a long-running controversy in women's basketball about where the three-point line should be painted. And the essential question they're tackling is, what is a fair three-point line for women? Is it a three-point line that is identical to the men's three-point line, so women shoot from the exact same distance? Or is it a line that is equivalently difficult for women, bearing in mind those height curves, so that women shoot from slightly closer but at a distance that is, on average, as hard for a slightly shorter woman to sink a three-point shot from compared to a slightly taller man? And because this is a matter of just a few inches, you might expect, and I think anyone who's in academia and the world in particular will expect, that this fine-grained distinction has drawn incredibly vicious fights. I will discuss some of the language explicitly in the book. I will repeat none of it here. But I think the reason the argument over the three-point line was seen as so threatening is because it's a very stark, visible difference. And many of the people defending the identical three-point lines, understanding that would mean women sank fewer three-point shots, said, well, you can't have people walk onto the basketball court and see that there are two lines there. Because once they do, they'll say, well, why are there two? the women shoot from the closer one, oh, so they can't have it. They play on easy mode. That making the difference visible would immediately, they assumed, erode respect for women basketball players. And I think descriptively, they weren't wrong to anticipate that blowback. Now, women's basketball is capable of tolerating other differences that are tuned to the difference between men and women. Women play with a smaller basketball in the WNBA than the men do in the NBA because they have one that's proportionately sized for their hands. But because they never come out at the beginning of the game to say, before we had tip-off, we just wanted to show you the women are playing with a slightly smaller basketball than the men. That difference was easier to tolerate, felt less dangerous. And I think this is the pattern we can see playing out in domain after domain with more trivial or more terrifying consequences. How much can we tolerate acknowledging the difference between men and women if we don't trust each other to treat men and women justly when we acknowledge those differences, when we can't fall back on this doctrine of sameness? Now, one lawyer who was very focused on this question of can women be treated equally and justly if women are different was the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who in her practice as a women's rights attorney, prior to her sitting on the court, never believed that the right to an abortion was reasonably grounded in an appeal to privacy, as the court held in Roe, and it didn't hold in Dobbs. She thought this was kind of a strange invention that didn't hold up very well, and ultimately the law didn't hold up in the end. She would have framed abortion rights jurisprudence through the lens of equal protection under the law, with the understanding being that men and women, to be equal under the law, had to be, essentially, equivalent, interchangeable. And if the law wanted to treat them equally, and they weren't identical biologically, then the law had to make allowance for how women could close that gap. As Ginsburg saw it, men had a freedom that women did not. It was easy for a man to abandon a child he fathered. All it took was cowardice. A man could leave. You could offer no forwarding address. You didn't even have to change your number in those days. There were no cell phones. You just had to run away. But for a woman to abandon a child, the child who was her child, could never be done as a mere act of withdrawing or refusing to step up. It always required outside intervention. It required poison, or it required a scalpel. And so what Ginsburg was appealing to, essentially, and this is, I think, pretty obviously my gloss, not hers, was an appeal to an equality of vice. Because men had the freedom to abandon someone who depended on them, women could not be treated as equal under the law unless they had that same freedom. Because otherwise, how could the law say, we will treat these two people equivalently? We will bind employers under penalty of discrimination law to treat these two people equally unless they enjoyed those same liberties, if not freedoms, to determine the course of their own life, even at the expense of their duties to another. Now, what made that feel like a safe appeal to me? What made it seem possible to put the baby at risk for the sake of this false equivalency, I think it comes not only out of a mistake about who men and women are in relationship to each other, but a mistake about who all of us are. Very often, the appeal to why a baby is not a person when they're in the womb begins with this appeal to autonomy on both sides. That the mother's autonomy is compromised by how much the baby is asking of her, both moment by moment in pregnancy, as the baby in the pregnancy makes her feel sick, makes her feel tired, disrupts her work schedule, changes the shape of her life, and then afterwards, in birth. That even under adoption, you remain this child's mother, and even parting ways anonymously does not actually sever that connection or change the fact that you have a child somewhere. So there's that claim that the mother's autonomy, her chance to, in the classical definition of autonomy, be a law unto herself, author her own future, is compromised. And meanwhile, what does the baby have to put against this in the pre-Dobbs era? Well, the baby is definitively not autonomous. The baby has a limited ability to will anything. I think we can all agree on that part. And the baby is marked by the fact that biologically, he or she cannot support him or herself. Now, I think everyone who has had a baby, or even just peeks at one of the babies helpfully brought as a visual reference to this talk, understands that babies do not, in fact, become autonomous at birth. A baby immediately after delivery is no more viable in the sense that we ask babies to prove themselves in the womb than they were before delivery. A baby now can breathe on his or her own, but cannot feed him or herself, clothe him or herself, change his or her diapers, go to work to provide economically for him or herself. And if this baby is not cared for by someone, he or she will die, as surely as he or she will die if you sever their connection to their mother in the womb. The only difference that occurs before to after delivery is now this decidedly dependent baby can have their dependence answered by someone other than their mother, either in shifts in the marriage or by someone else entirely in adoption. But the essential nature of the baby hasn't changed. But increasingly, we've used that appeal to dependence as the characteristic that can unperson someone, as the explanation for why it might be licit to end this person's life. And we don't just do it in the womb. Increasingly, we do it after birth as people approach death, as they age, as they become sick. So at this moment, and not very far from where I'm standing today in Canada, 1 out of every 20 deaths comes at a doctor's hand, usually through lethal injection, because Canada has legalized and praised euthanasia as the way to die with dignity before you lose too much of your autonomy, thus too much of yourself. In America, we haven't gone quite as far as Canada has, both in the raw numbers. We don't have a national euthanasia law. And even in the states that have legalized euthanasia, they haven't expanded the categories of people who are eligible with the enthusiasm that Canada and other European nations have. But in the states that have, in Oregon, I believe specifically, we ask people who are seeking lethal drugs to end their life, why are you doing this as part of this state's record keeping? And one thing that's notable is that many of the appeals in state legislatures for euthanasia as a route to death with dignity have appealed to the physical pain and difficulty of dying as the reason why this is necessary legally. But when people explain why they seek to die in a way blessed by the state as licit, they don't cite pain as their primary reason for applying for the drugs. Many more people cite the fear of being a burden to their loved ones, which is not a pure biological reality. The fact that as you become older, as you become terminally ill, you will need a great deal from the people who love you, that's a biological reality. But the idea that in so needing them, you are wronging them is a philosophical claim. It doesn't come naturally from that need. But I think it does remain related to the idea that needing someone too much, needing them in a way where you won't recover, won't reascend to interdependence, won't pay them back, represents a kind of human failure that could put your life at risk whether you are very young or very old, is the same kind of objection about what it means to be human at its most basic. And I think it's helpful to kind of just pause and say, well, if that's our definition of humanity, if we consider for a moment the implications throughout life of this ideal of autonomy, well, for how much of a normal human life is anyone really vibrantly human? To kind of fudge the numbers in autonomy's favor, let's consider the life of a young man so that we don't need to worry about pregnancy directly at all. So he is born, not autonomous, kind of slowly rising to greater and greater self-mastery and ability until at some point, and I leave it to you to decide whether that's 16, 18, 22, hopefully not much further than that. I leave it to some of your own judgment of your peers. Like, we can say, this young man, like, he was not a real person in the womb. He wasn't really a real person as a baby, but we're giving it to him on sufferance. He's in an apprenticeship for being a person. Gradually, he comes to resemble a person more and more as a pile of sand becomes a heap, until finally, there's some ineffable last skill he acquires, possibly learning how to boil an egg on his own. He is a person now. He can do enough. He can provide for himself. He can clothe himself. He can feed himself. He can drive. He is a person. Let's say it's 18. All right, well, he can continue for a while, maintaining the ideal of autonomy. There may be some wobbles, The week he has the flu, well, that's a pretty tough week. He's not really able to take care of himself, but it's a week, it's a blip. He goes back to being a normal person. It's a temporary aberration, not who he really is. And playing intramural basketball all the way into when you're 25, but not really conditioning for it, well, that was a pretty rough sprained ankle. But he needed some things, but not too many things. And here he is, 25. He's thinking about getting married, like he's thinking about it in a broad and general way. It will happen at some point, Mom. But for the moment, he isn't married. His parents are in good health. There's no one he loves who can make strong claims on him, or no one he anticipates whose health will disrupt his plans. Keeps going, 30, 32, okay, he did it, he got married. His wife has a baby, things get a little tricky. He's not sleeping, is that losing your autonomy and your humanity? Well, not probably most of the time, but honestly tonight it feels like it. Okay, no, I'm back to being a person. Maybe one more baby, pretty good, but still everything is pretty good. And then, with his kids in elementary school, his wife, she's lost the baby weight, she's back in yoga, he never worries about her health, he's crossing the street, he's hit by a bus, and he dies. Congratulations, that was like a very solid 80% of your life as a full human being. Let's run the clock back, let's do it one more time. Starts as a baby, very embarrassing, but he grows out of it, good job, he's learned to cook, he's learned to drive. Maybe he gets married a little earlier, 28, that's not unreasonable. His wife has a really difficult delivery. So the baby comes early, baby is in the NICU, wife spends a while recovering from surgery, he has to take time off work even though he's fine, technically. Nothing is wrong with him, but he loves enough people that he can't continue ordering his life in the way he wanted to. So it's a few months of disruption before it feels like he gets back to normal, but it's going okay. It was hard, but they don't anticipate it will always be this hard, so a little bit later, I like this baby a lot. Second baby, it's not unusually hard, it's an okay delivery, it's still hard in its way. And so as he's navigating that, keeping the 2-year-old off the baby, it feels like most of the time he's fully human by this definition, it's just sometimes he wonders. And then he gets the call from his mom that his dad is having more and more trouble, doesn't understand what's going on with the checkbook, got lost driving to the grocery store. And now he's got to balance not only his obligations to his baby and to his wife, but to his parents, and to figure out how to help his dad transition to memory care. So, again, he's fine. Consider him on his own, he's all right, but it never feels like he's back where he was in those early 20s. It feels like he's scattered. He can't unite all of his attention on one thing. He's always got one part of himself that's listening for a call about whether something's happened with dad. Occasionally something's happened at the elementary school. But he's able mostly, 80% of the time, to meet the needs of the people he loves. And 20% of the time a ball gets dropped or he has to ask for help. And then as he's going, 40, one more baby, it's kind of exciting. He feels like he knows what he's doing, he's not dipping as far. But he is pretty busy, and so he doesn't always listen when his wife nags him to go to the doctor. And it turns out after missing a couple of appointments, he has colon cancer. And from there, it is a prolonged decline with the help of his family, with the help of his older kids, with the help of his mom, even as she's helping his dad. And so eventually he's making that decline much earlier than he anticipated. And even though he was young and strong once, much more of his life with everyone he loved is characterized by what he needs from them and what they give to him, until at last he dies in his wife's arms. Now, in the secular accounting of autonomy, the first life was better. That idea that we want to live as vividly and independently as possible, that when we start to lose our independence, we start to lose ourselves, and that the ideal way to go is to be, in some extent, cut down in a moment of strength. No decline, very little pain, a surprise, no need for fear or preparation. That's what a good life looks like. And it's that second life where he lives longer, is exposed to more pain, both his own and those of the people he loves. that is the lesser life. But I think even for folks who would verbally assent to the law of autonomy, that ideal of autonomy, the second life looks better. The second life is richer. The second life, he feels weaker moment to moment because he's taken on a greater responsibility rather than constraining his life to only the duties he is certain he can meet. And I think both as Catholics and as lovers of the great books, there's one other thing that's a little odd about that first life, which is the idea of dying suddenly with no warning is not a Christian idea of what good death looks like. In fact, if you look at Hamlet, this is the death that Hamlet wants for Claudius. That when Hamlet imagines, how should I take revenge on my uncle? He thinks explicitly, well, I can't kill him while he's praying, because his sins might be forgiven. What would I be doing? Might as well have hired me, Hamlet says to himself. He thinks, I want to catch him in a good moment, as Claudius sees him, and fall upon him as sudden vengeance with no time to shrive himself. So that for Catholics, even aside from some of the other considerations I've mentioned, that idea that we want our lives to be lived to the fullest, which means embracing the final moments, the difficult moments, so that we have the opportunity to use all of our life, including our times of suffering, as a way to know Christ, rather than to be surprised by death and not be able to shrive ourselves or take a moment to unite ourselves in prayer. That is the other big divergence. So for secular friends or people who don't love Hamlet quite as much, it may feel less compelling or unsettling to say, as many people do, well, I hope I die in my sleep while I'm still healthy. I hope I give up everything else I have after that so that I could miss the moment of my dying to whatever extent that is possible. Because I think one of the great opportunities we have to witness in the world is to look at the very hardest parts of life and to say, these too are for you. That it is not our moments of weakness, sickness, pregnancy, and suffering that rob us of our human life. This is what a human life looks like. There are no moments in that kind of great trapezoid of human life where you cease to be a human. You just are a human being who is having a hard time and who needs a great deal from the people around you. And I fall into this myself. While I was writing this book, I had a period that combined both severe pregnancy nausea and a staph infection that sent me to the ER while pregnant. I couldn't help but hear myself saying, like, oh, I barely existed in November. I spent so much time lying down, unable to do things for my bigger kids, and just feeling miserable. And I was like, I can't say that, I'm writing a whole book about it. That's not true. And even so, it came naturally out of my mouth. Because when I think of myself as a doer rather than a being, it's natural that I have grade my existence by what I am producing, by the debts I'm paying back. And harder to hold on to the sense of what my worth could be in the times when most of my activities are lying on a couch moaning faintly while people do things for me. But I want to live a life in which I am capable of receiving people's love in those moments. And I think part of the witness we're trying to offer is not just along that horizontal axis. How can men and women not feel ashamed of who they are and their need for each other? How can friends not let their need be an obstacle to their friendship rather than an invitation to deepen their friendship? How can all of us feel brave enough to take on greater responsibilities and greater loves for others, even when that will perturb our autonomy, leave us exposed as failures far more often than if we hadn't made those promises and loved so deeply? So I think all of those horizontal concerns are sufficient reason to reject this autonomous idea and say, well, it is not possible for anyone to live a successful life by this metric. This isn't a human life, and the only question is, at what point in your life will you get caught as a non-autonomous person? Everyone will get caught eventually. What makes this a feminist book is that women tend to get caught earlier. So to some extent, have the gift of having a more difficult time living within this lie, finding it intolerable earlier, versus a man might skate by for longer if he's fortunate and strong and physically adept, before he realizes in his late 20s or in his 30s, wow, I cannot author my own life. I will need other people. I will not always be a giver of the gifts of my strength, even though I love to do this. Women get caught earlier partly just by considering the potential to harbor a stranger who you hope to come to love. To realize that part of what you do, part of your embodied nature, is making a gift of self in a way that you do not script moment to moment, do not control. And then for both mother and father is a lifelong relationship with a part of your heart who is an independent being, with all the pleasures and dangers and moments of panic that entails. But we all get caught eventually. And if you are so lucky as to live a relatively independent life, rising to autonomy, living a small and narrow enough life that there are almost no perturbations, just an occasional flu. And other than that, always having your strength be equal to your responsibilities, because your responsibilities are circumscribed until the sudden moment where you die, never having failed anyone, never having needed anyone since you were out of your parents' house. Even those people will be caught out as non-autonomous eventually. And that is because, very simply put, and to draw on St. John Henry Newman, doctor of the church, this is not who we are. And if we hold on to this line, we'll wreck ourselves on these shores. What Newman wrote is, we cannot be our own masters. We are God's property by creation, by redemption, by regeneration. He has a triple claim on us. Is it not our happiness thus to view the matter? Is it any happiness or any comfort to consider that we are our own? It may be thought so by the young and prosperous. But as time goes on, they, as all men, will find that independence was not made for man, that it is an unnatural state that may do for a while but will not carry us on safely to the end. We are creatures, and as being such, we have two duties: to be resigned and to be thankful. But I would say that a world that denies this fundamental element of our nature, that imagines we are creatures only in moments of failure, or only in exceptional moments at the very beginning and end of our life, but for the most part, we are authors, we are creators, we are givers of our own strength. And creatures is an embarrassing thing that some people are briefly, but if we're polite, we look away. That world does not invite us to be resigned and to be thankful. It offers us two rival duties: to be secretive and to be resentful. And I think depending on your status in life, your own strength, your own wealth, you may find it more or less doable to carry out those duties of secrecy and resentfulness, of hiding the things that make you non-autonomous. If you're a woman, of treating yourself as though you're a defective man, and then trying to find ways, as Ginsburg hoped, of remedying the gap by whatever means necessary. If a man, you don't quite even have the excuse of sexism, of saying, well, this is a standard men can meet, but I can't as a woman, so I've got to do something to bridge the gap. For men, just this sense of loneliness, of, well, this is what human beings are, and just me, it's just me not doing it. But if I work very hard, maybe I can keep anyone from finding out. But in the end, if we harbor those feelings of secretiveness and resentfulness, which I think all of us are tempted by at various moments, just as I was, then we are not prepared to receive the ultimate answer to our creatureliness, to receive the ultimate love that we cannot repay, which is Christ's sacrifice on the cross. The ultimate debt, the ultimate dependence, with no pretense of an interdependence of, well, I'm going to do as much for you as I possibly can. Maybe I can get us within the same order of magnitude here. Maybe I can in some way make the case for myself as not a mere creature, but a collaborator, right? Like an almost a peer. We can deceive ourselves about that in many human relationships. But our relationship with God is the one that lays that lie of autonomy bare. But it is our relationship with each other, those horizontal relationships day by day in the ordinary moments of life, of pregnancy, of illness, of aging, of youth, of poverty, that train us to say, am I willing to admit to being who I am, a creature? And am I willing to make that the channel by which others may love me? And through those moments of practice, little by little, we hopefully train ourselves to, in that final moment, be willing to accept the ultimate gift, the unrecompensable gift, that we pray to the Lord we are not too ashamed to look up and acknowledge. I think you all have tremendous good news to share with the world. Because whether you make these arguments explicitly through the language of Christ's sacrifice, or in a more neutral way through that horizontal dimension of how we love each other, and whether we feel constrained to conceal ourselves and hide for our whole lives, or willing to admit to who we are and make that the thing that binds us together, you have the chance to say it is good to be a human being. It is all right to tell the truth about the differences between men and women. It is all right to tell the truth about how much we need each other throughout our lives, more pronounced at some moments than others. And it is only through this truth that we can ultimately be set free.